2022. The United States has a history of science and politics playing a role in exploring the moon. It happened in the 1950s and 1960s with the space race, and it is happening again with NASA's Artemis moon mission set to launch later this year. But why repeat what has already been done? Criticism on this has risen in recent years, but NASA argues that reconquering the moon is a must before a trip to the Red Planet. Here's why. The space race. On September 12, 1962, then U.S. President John F. Kennedy told the public he planned to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. It was the height of the Cold War. America needed a big victory to demonstrate its space superiority after the Soviet Union had launched the first satellite and put the first man in orbit around Earth. Orbit means to travel around something. The United States met its goal when the Apollo 11 spacecraft landed on the moon on July 20, 1969. Astronauts took their first steps on the surface and over the course of the mission, brought back nearly 900 pounds, 400 kilograms, of lunar rock to Earth to study. The samples that we collected during the Apollo missions changed the way we view our solar system, astronaut Jessica Meyer told Agence France-Presse. Learn more about the moon and human health. No one has been back to the moon since the Apollo mission ended decades ago. The hope is that a return visit will teach scientists more about the moon's characteristics and how it can support human visitors. NASA's goal is to have moon missions last several weeks, compared to just a few days for Apollo. Knowing more about the moon will help scientists better understand how to prepare for a round trip to Mars, which takes many months. Part of this work requires learning more about the effects that space has on human health. For example, in deep space, radiation is much more intense and poses a real threat to health. Radiation is when electromagnetic waves carry energy from one place to another, including across empty spaces. For now, the only approximation we have for life above Earth's surface is the International Space Station ISS. The ISS travels around Earth, but is also partly shielded from radiation by the Earth's magnetic field. The Moon, on the other hand, is more exposed to radiation in space, and therefore is a helpful testing ground to see how radiation could affect humans. Many experiments on the upcoming Artemis mission are planned to study the impact of this radiation on living things, and to assess the effectiveness of an anti-radiation vest. Building and testing new supplies. Astronauts working on the ISS frequently get shipments of supplies from Earth. The Moon is 1,000 times further than the ISS, and so packing for this type of trip is much more complex. To avoid having to take everything with them, and to save costs, NASA wants to learn how to use the resources present on the Moon's surface. In particular, water in the form of ice, which has been confirmed to exist on the lunar South Pole, could be transformed into rocket fuel by cracking it into its separate hydrogen and oxygen atoms. NASA also wants to use the Moon to test out new technologies required for a sustained presence in space. The benefit of working on the Moon is that it is only a few days away from Earth, while a trip to Mars takes many months. Some things it hopes to test out include new spacesuits, new vehicles and new habitats that astronauts can move around in. In addition, NASA is working on the development of a portable nuclear energy source to power electricity. Finally, it hopes to build a space station in orbit around the Moon, which will serve as a place to stop and fuel up before the trip to Mars. Maintaining leadership over China. During the space race of the 1960s, Russia was the main competitor of the United States. Today, it is China. In fact, China plans to send Chinese astronauts known as taikonauts to the Moon by 2030. We don't want China suddenly getting there and saying, "This is our exclusive territory," NASA boss Bill Nelson said in a recent interview.